Well, welcome everyone. On behalf of one of the sponsors, First Presbyterian Church that you see here, welcome you to this event, and we welcome you, Chuck, back to Shreveport. Good to see you again. Thank you all. I just want to welcome you. If you have any needs, bathrooms are out that door and up the steps. We thank Community Renewal and the Institute for Community Renewal for refreshments. If there's anything else you need while you're here, please see me. My name is Chris Curry. I'm the pastor head of staff here, and we are grateful to partner with the Institute for Community Renewal and these other sponsors to welcome Chuck and to have this discussion about strong towns. I would like to turn things over to the director of the Institute for Community Renewal and also a member at First Presbyterian Church, Kim Mitchell, who's going to introduce our speaker.
All right. I think that's well. I appreciate you all being here, and I am thankful for all of our sponsors that joined with the Institute for Community Renewal, including the Metropolitan Planning Commission, who will be with Chuck in the morning, and Allendale Strong, a neighborhood organization, and the Allendale Corner Store Co-op, and John Perkins have all helped bring Chuck to town, and we're thankful for all of them. And just by way of introduction, Charles Marohn, known as Chuck, is a licensed engineer in the state of Minnesota, and he's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. He's the founder and president of a movement, Strong Towns. He's graduated with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Minnesota, Institute of Technology, and a Master of Urban and Regional Planning degree from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey Institute. His organization is really starting a movement to change the way we invest infrastructure in our country, and I think you'll enjoy his message. He's presented Strong Towns concepts to hundreds of cities across the country, and in 2017 he was named one of the 10 most influential urbanists of all time by Planetson. He's done a lot of things and making a lot of progress. One that impressed me is he recently has had an impact on changing the main lobbying arm for transportation investment or infrastructure investment in our country called Transportation for America. And they are now taking a policy not to go for more money, but to get more value for what we spend. He's the author of a recent book that I hope all of you will order. I think he has a few copies here today. Strong Towns, a Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild American Prosperity. So without going into some of the other qualifications, Chuck, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. I got off the plane today, and everybody, I'm from Minnesota, and so it was single digits when I left home today, temperature, and I got off the plane, and it was so beautiful, nice out and warm, and then people were complaining about the weather. But all these people were wearing purple. And I thought, well, that's a very generous way to greet me. I have to say, I wasn't sure, and I don't mean to insult you, because it's clear to me now, but I wasn't sure, just with your proximity to Dallas, whether there would be Cowboy fans here or Saints fans here. I get it now. I'm very good. So I get it. I apologize. I won't push anybody tonight. No push-offs for me here. Is that a little too soon for that? I would feel worse, and I wouldn't tease you at all, except in my life, okay, so Minnesota, we've gone to the Super Bowl 4 times. None of them in my lifetime. I think they were all, I'm 46. They might have been when I was a little kid, but I think they were even earlier than that. Fran Tarkenton era. This is way before I remember anything about football. Do you know how many Super Bowls we have won? That would be 0. So we've lost 4. We really had 2 legitimate opportunities in my life where we were the clear favorite team and we were going to win. One of them, we got to the NFC Championship game, went into overtime, and kicked a field goal wide left at the beginning of, at the end of regulation. Gary Anderson did, and we went overtime. We lost to Atlanta, and then Atlanta went on to win the Super Bowl. The second time was against you all, where Brett Favre was marching down the field. We were in field goal range, and we were for sure going to score. And he did the wounded duck pass that we knew would break our hearts ultimately, and he did. And you intercepted it, and then you went and won the Super Bowl. So, yeah. So I'm happy for you. We're going to all be friends. But no hard feelings over this weekend, last past weekend.
That all sounds good, but your timing pushed off on it.
I'll accept. I know we at Minnesota, the University of Minnesota is the Gophers, which I know just the thought of the Gophers strikes fear into everyone's hearts. We had one of our few winning seasons of my lifetime this last year, and actually went to a New Year's Day bowl game, which we were like, there's bowl games on New Year's Day? We didn't even know that was a possibility. So we had one on New Year's Day, which was really exciting for us, but I understand you have an even better one coming up here. So good luck to all of you. I'm from a little town a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's called Brainerd, if any of you have ever been to Minnesota. For those of you now, when I was in New Orleans for the first time, I was coming in on a taxi into the city, and I said, what is this big lake here? And they said, well, that's the Mississippi River. No way. The Mississippi River runs 4 blocks from my house. You could throw a baseball across it, where I'm at. So, in fact, I'll show you on the map here as we go. That is the Mississippi River in Brainerd. This is the city of Brainerd right here. This is the city of Baxter. Brainerd's 13,500 people. That's where my family's from. That's where my wife and I met when we were in junior high and dated all through high school. We went off to college, came back. She is a news reporter, and I do this. We both live in a little house here in North Brainerd. This is where I grew up, and my family has been here for over 100 years. I am an engineer and a planner. I'm also very active and involved in the community. I'm one of those people who reads the meeting minutes for the city council meetings. Occasionally we'll turn on the local cable channel and watch them make motions and debate things. I'm that person. So I've read all the plans. I spent 3 years, I just got done last month on the Planning Commission, so I've read all the ordinances. I've been involved in basically what's going on in the city for many, many, many years, professionally and also just as an active citizen. One day I woke up, and on the front page of the paper was an article that down at the legislature, our legislative delegation was asking for money to run sewer and water out to the airport on the far edge of town. It was a huge, huge project, big dollar amount. This was on the front page of the newspaper. And the thing that was puzzling to me is that I had never heard of this project. I've been involved in all this stuff. I've been around the meetings. Something this big, you'd think I would have heard of it. Where did this come from? Where is this idea? $7.1 million. That was the cost of the project. Just to give you, because I know, we're at an age and a time when, $1 billion here, $1 trillion there, we lose track of money. Our entire city budget in a year is $9 million. So in response to in proportion to our budget, this is a huge, massive project. Not one that I had ever heard of before. The way that newspapers work in small towns is that we have what's called a stringer down at the state capitol. So a stringer will report for many, many, many local newspapers, and they will write a brief. Here's what's gone on and how it affects you. And then if it's an important story, the next day the local paper will follow up. Well, this is one of those briefs, and they're like, well, we gotta we got to figure out what's going on here. And so the local newspaper contacted our legislative delegation and said, hey, what's happening? At the time, we were represented in the House by a Democrat, a guy named John Ward. He goes to my church. He's a very nice guy. I know him very well. They asked John, hey, what's going on with this project? We've never heard of this before. And John said, well, let me tell you, I listen to my constituents. This was the quote in the paper. I listen to my constituents, and this is what I was told you want. If this isn't what you want, let me know, and we'll do something different. They then went to the Senate. We were represented in the Senate by a woman named Carrie Root. Carrie is a Republican. She is the mayor of a town just north of Brainerd. I've worked with her when she was mayor. I like her a lot. She's very nice. We get along very well. They asked Carrie the same thing, and she said, you know what? We've got a process down here that we go through. We've got to get bills introduced and get things moving. Let's get this one moving. And if things, don't work out or they change or we decide to change it, we can always pull it back. We just can't introduce it later. So let's get this process going and then see where we end up. Okay, that didn't really answer anyone's question. And so people kept digging, and I was one of them who kept kind of pushing and pushing and pushing and saying, hey, what is going on here? Where did this project come from? After about a week, the city was kind of cajoled into issuing a press release, which they did to explain where this came from. The city's press release said, basically, the impetus was a directive that they received from the state fire marshal, who said they had to make some improvements out at the airport before a certain time frame, or they were going to be, in trouble. And so they had, essentially the city, had asked for the money from the legislature to deal with this mandate from the fire marshal. Now, let's pause here for a second, because part of this conversation is explaining how the sausage is made. So let's pause here and understand this, because I've been in many, many of these meetings and can explain how these things go down kind of intuitively. What happened is the city and the county jointly owned the airport property. Series of improvements were made. Basically, we got some money from the federal government to build a conference room, a jet bridge, and a restaurant. Now, I do travel for business probably 35 weeks a year out of 52. I never fly out of the Brainerd Airport. They have 2 flights a day, one in the very early morning, one late at night. I don't know why you would need a restaurant, but we have one now. We have a really nice glass conference room. And I know why we have a jet bridge, but I have to say, I'm a little bit turned off by it. I always liked landing in February at like 10:30 at night, getting off the plane and going full Minnesota on everybody. And you could pick out really quickly who was not a native and who was. Because the rest of us, we would just walk off the plane like this is like we're home. And everybody else would be, oh my gosh, do people actually live in this place? Because you'd have to walk across the tarmac and all that. It was very empowering. That's gone now. They took that away from us. But as part of this, the fire marshal now said, you have more space, you have a restaurant, you have to increase your fire protection capacity. I'm burdened with being an engineer, so I know what the fire marshal meant. I actually went and got their report so I could understand it. They meant add a little bit of a larger tank out there to hold some spare water, come up with a different plan for deploying your fire trucks, make sure you got a big enough pumper truck, whatever. The city used this as an opportunity to essentially ask for money from the state. And so now we have, at the state legislature, a request for $7.1 million to do this project. Of course, we all know how those go. Once the request is made, even though it's not been part of a formal plan, a study, there's no real need demonstrated at the local level besides this one, kind of loose connection to the fire marshal. These things start to take on a life of their own. And as I'm going around town talking to people about it, I think what you could call the barbershop talk or the coffee shop talk starts to go in ways that are very predictable. Come on, Chuck. It's going to create jobs. We lead the state in unemployment. Brainerd does, generally. And by lead, I don't mean best. I mean worse. in the depths of the last recession, the state unemployment rate was at 7 or 8%. We were at 12, 14%. So we're always a little bit worse than everybody else. They're like, Chuck, you can't oppose this. It's going to create jobs. Come on. Chuck, it's not going to cost us anything. If we don't take this money from the state, if the state doesn't give it to us, it's just going to go to someone else. Like, why would we say no to money that the state's going to give us? Think of all the development opportunities. Think of all the land now. We're going to have all this pipe that runs out to the edge of town. Think of all the things we can hook up and connect to and develop. This is going to create great growth potential for us, Chuck. And then, of course, think of the children. The fire marshal is saying we have to do this. Are you going to stand up and tell the fire marshal that we shouldn't do this, that we're not going to do this project? Shame on you, Chuck. Come on, get on board. And so the talk around town starts to kind of morph around this project that nobody has heard of. All of a sudden, there's gaining a little bit of steam and momentum. Like, maybe we'd be open to this. Maybe this is something we should do. Well, the legislature ultimately acts, because that's what they do, right? This is an off-year budget, so they're allocating these big capital projects. They allocate money to the city of Brainerd for this project. Of course, they're smart legislators. They don't give us everything we want. They give us just enough to make it painful, right? So now we have a local match that we have to come up with. It's way more than we ever would have spent on this project if we had come up with this project ourselves. But now we've been awarded this money, and so we have got to make this really tough decision. Do we accept it or not? And by accepting it, we're going to have to come up with 20% ourselves, a big dollar amount we don't have. What happens then? All the local contractors, the engineering firms, the non-governmental organizations, everybody who brushes shoulders with legislators at some times, they come out of the woodwork. They start going to the meetings. They start writing letters to the editor. They start going to the Rotary clubs and talking about this. They say things like, look, our legislative delegation, they're down there fighting for us. They went to work for us. They fought to get us this money. We have to do our share. They got the ball to the 20-yard line. We got to take it over the goal line. And so all of a sudden now, there's all this, professional high-level momentum for the project. This is what we call the project development process. And what we wind up with at the end of the day is a fully funded project. A project that is all ready to go. We've got the conceptual design done. We know where we're going to go, what we're going to do. We've got a dollar amount. We've got it funded, and we're all ready to go. What is the thing that's missing at this point from this public process? Yeah, the public, right? Like all of us. We've not really been, besides the coffee shop talk, we've not really been engaged in this process in any way. Don't worry, there's a way that we take care of that. We have what's called the public hearing process, or the public engagement process. We will go out and we will present 3 options to people, right? 3 things for us to consider. Option number 1 is a gold-plated pipe out to the airport that will solve all of our problems forevermore. Option number 2 is to do nothing and to face the wrath of the fire marshal. And option number 3 is this nice moderate option, kind of a compromise between the two. Something that, oh, by the way, is 80% funded by the state government. What you say, please. And we wonder why people are mad, right? We wonder why people get angry. We wonder why they don't feel represented or respected by these processes. We're spending 80%, we set out to spend 80% of our annual budget on a project that literally 6 months before nobody had heard of. Had not been contemplated, was not a priority, was not something any of us thought really needed to happen. But because of the process that we've set up to deliver this type of project over and over and over, we're now sitting with this sucking all the air out of the room. This is the focus of our staff. This is the focus of our community. This is the focus of our entire conversation. If we want cities to work for us, if we want the community to actually lead where we spend our money, where we spend our effort, where we spend our time, we have to start with this process. And we have to take this process and actually flip it on its head. It needs to begin in some other place. As opposed to beginning at the staff level or even at a high-level council level, instead of being the wishes or the dreams of some insider, we actually need to start our project development process with the needs of people within the community. If you were at my talk that I gave in November when I was here, I talked about a 4-step process that cities use to identify the highest returning investments. Tonight, we're going to put some meat on those bones. That was one slide and one concept, and tonight we're going to talk about that with some greater depth. There is a concept or a saying out of Silicon Valley that we can apply and we need to apply to project development and capital spending within our cities. It goes something like this. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb. While innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. If we ask people what they prefer, we will all say we prefer smart to dumb. But if you actually delve into it, we have an overwhelming preference for order over chaos. We will tolerate an amazing amount of dumb so that we never experience disorder. And if you doubt me, think of the last time you sat at a traffic signal at 1 in the morning. Right? We will gladly tolerate dumb so that we don't live in a world that has even a tiny bit of chaos. Let me show you what this looks like from a public project standpoint. You all know this city here, right? We're close enough where people know what I'm talking about. Up in Minnesota, everyone's like, where is this? I don't get it. This is Memphis, Tennessee. I happen to really love Memphis. I've been able to spend a lot of time there. They've been generous in inviting me, much as you have, to come and share ideas with them and learn from them, much like I've had the opportunity to do here. It's been a great exchange. And I've learned a lot from Memphis. I really love them. I love the passion they have for their place. But Memphis is plagued by the burden of decades and decades and decades of the big silver bullet project. The big thing that would solve all the problems, the big top-down thing that they could do, that they could get money for, that was going to save them and make them something else. One of them is this right here, the pyramid. Back in the 1980s, the city of Memphis decided that the thing that they needed the most, the thing they needed to spend their energy and effort on, was attracting an NBA team. So what they did is they went out and they built a pyramid-shaped stadium and then went searching for a team to fill it. They ultimately landed a team. I don't know if you have a preferred basketball team here. Is it the Pelicans? Does anyone care about basketball in this state? Not lately, you know. They got the Grizzlies to move to Memphis from anybody? Vancouver. Yeah. So Vancouver Grizzlies moved to Memphis, where there are no Grizzlies, but there are now basketball players. The problem is the Grizzlies didn't like this stadium. And so the city of Memphis wound up building a new stadium a few blocks from this one. This one sat empty for a long, long time. Let me give you another example from Memphis. This is a little street called Broad Avenue. Yeah.
You might point out what the pyramid is.
Oh, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little suspense moment here for people who don't know what the pyramid is today. They didn't tear it down. There's a little street called Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue is a former streetcar stop. Back in the day, the streetcar would stop there, people would get off. There was a bunch of commercial businesses, a whole neighborhood around it. In the 1950s, as the city was growing and embracing the next new project, they ripped up the streetcar lines. They ran a highway through the middle of this neighborhood. Without the streetcar, without the foot traffic, this neighborhood just died. These businesses were empty. These buildings were run down. And things did not look good in this neighborhood. Some citizens in this area, fed up with the decline, fed up with the neglect, went out and took matters into their own hands. They worked with the owners of these buildings to get them swept up, swept out, cleaned up. They cleaned up the sidewalks. They took paint from the hardware store and painted their own crosswalks, their own bike lanes. They invited businesses from around the community to come in and open up for a weekend, just as like a street party to kind of demonstrate what could happen if someone actually cared. They had a bike shop, they had an art gallery, they had an ice cream stand. They didn't go get Department of Health inspections, they didn't go get city permission. They just went out and did this. They said, by the time anybody gets mad and comes to shut us down, we're going to be gone anyway. Let's just go make this as nice as we can with the tools that we have on hand. And that's what they did. 2 examples. That pyramid is now today the world's biggest Bass Pro Shop. Yep. In order to make that happen, the city of Memphis and the state of Tennessee had to give Bass Pro Company over $200 million of additional public subsidy beyond what's gone into the building already, the sunk cost. Just because we're among friends here tonight, they had projected, this is very sad, they had projected as part of this redevelopment with the Bass Pro, a certain level of sales tax income that would be generated by this new building. And in year 1, it was supposed to be this much, because year 1's so exciting, and then in year 2, it would drop off, and year 3 drop off, and then it would reach like a status, like a stable point. Year 1, their actual revenue was 50% of what they projected. Year 2, it fell off to, I think, 25% of what they projected, and it is now stabilized at a much lower base than what they have projected. It's very, very sad. Again, no critique of Memphis as people, but as a process, orderly but dumb. That little block in Broad Avenue, people went out and did this little project. I wasn't there when they did it. They brought me out there 6 months later. When I was out, every storefront was full. Every building was now occupied. There were businesses in there. The second stories were full. It was the little people trying to get a go of it, right? There were no chains. There were no franchises. It was just people from the neighborhood filling this space, making use of it. The city looked at this and said, something special has happened here. And they actually tracked it. What they found, $15 million increase in private investment in this neighborhood after this project. 50% increase in rents, so the landlords were actually, because of the demand, were able to bump up the value of those properties. They have 25 new businesses in there, 25 properties that were renovated, and 17 properties that were formerly labeled blighted that have now been taken off the blighted list. Total public investment here, 0. This is chaotic but smart. Incidentally, when I started the book tour on October 1st, we wanted to start it, I wanted to start it, in Memphis, Tennessee, and that's what we did. My book came out October 1st, October 2nd, I was in Memphis to give a talk. And prior to that talk, we went out and looked at Broad Avenue. Broad Avenue today does not look at all like this. These lanes are all gone, all this stuff is gone. And what's in place for these 2 blocks is permanent concrete. It's now been put in permanently. They essentially think of this as like a test. They tested it. They showed that it created value, it created wealth, it created opportunity. They went in after they did this prototype essentially and said this worked. They put it in permanently. When they put it in permanently, they planted nice trees, put in nice benches, put in nice touches. The businesses along here are amazing. They're growing. They're becoming more successful. And here's the really, really cool part. This is a 2-block stretch. If you go 2 blocks north and 2 blocks south, you know what it looks like? It looks like this. They did it all with paint, temporary. They're trying it out. They're saying, can we get this little love that's going here to spread at very low cost to the rest of this neighborhood? People in Memphis, and I'm going to emphasize the process here of being one chaotic but smart. One of the things that to me is intoxicating about Memphis, one of the reasons I'm so enamored with them and what they do, is that in many ways they're very desperate. They're very poor and they're very desperate. But the desperation of poverty, when it's allowed to react to it, is just the most brilliant style of development you will ever see. these people know how to hack things, make them work, and make them work brilliantly. I am continually amazed by the stuff that I see come out of the city of Memphis, Broad Avenue being one of them. The thing about Broad Avenue, and the thing about this chaotic but smart process, is it actually harkens back to the way that humans have built their cities literally for thousands and thousands of years. When we look back and we study human settlement, we can go around the world to different continents, different cultures, different latitudes, and what we see is that humans built their habitat in ways that were very, very similar. The development styles might look a little bit different, the architecture might be a little bit different, but the assembly methods were very similar. Cities would start with a little collection of pop-up shacks. They could have been made of adobe, they could have been made like these, of wood, they could have been made of whatever materials were around. The idea was you just get started with a little bet, a small little investment. This is my hometown, Brainerd, Minnesota, back in 1870. This is the first iteration of my city. A little collection of pop-up shacks, some hopes and some dreams about the future. If we went back to the original layout and design of Shreveport, the very first iteration of this city, I guarantee you, looked like that. The very first iteration of Manhattan looked like that. Of Houston, of Dallas, of New Orleans looked exactly like that. Some people with a few dreams about the future, they created what they could with what they had, and they looked forward to better days. We built thousands of these across North America, just like this. And for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places failed. They never got beyond this phase. What happens when a place like this fails? Does the stock market crash? Does unemployment skyrocket? Do we have to have an emergency session of Congress to bail out banks? Of course not. We know what this is. These are little bets. The people here, they salvage what they can, they move on to the next place. We built thousands of these across this continent. And for a variety of complex reasons, reasons that defy our ability to predict or project, or even to fully understand after the fact, a lot of these places were successful. And when they were successful, they would grow in a very simple way. They would grow incrementally up, incrementally out, and become incrementally more intense. More and more people would move to the place, building their own pop-up shacks. The energy of those people coming together would actually raise the underlying land values. As the underlying land values increase, there's a natural redevelopment pressure on these properties. And in the course of 30 years, in my hometown, this little street of pop-up shacks would become a street with 2- and 3-story wood structures. This is the exact same street 30 years later. And after another generation of incrementally growing up, oh, you didn't get it. Incrementally growing out and incrementally becoming more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood buildings would ultimately grow to be buildings like this, buildings of brick and granite. The way cities have built wealth historically is incrementally. Small investments over a broad area over a long period of time. The way cities have provided opportunity for people to start with nothing and end with something is by having a development pattern that grew incrementally over a broad area over a long period of time. This is a development pattern, essentially a way of assembling human habitat that was tested and refined and honed by us, humans, around the world for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. This is how we build our habitat. If you think of bees building a beehive, we intuitively grasp and understand that the bees and the beehive are, in a sense, co-evolved. They work together. The beehive is actually designed and organized to harmonize the bees. And we grasp, we kind of get, we understand that if you took a beehive and said, you know what, I think we could do better. These bees seem a little bit, out of sorts. Let's build a bee cul-de-sac and a bee frontage road, and we'll put the honey part over here, and the queen, she can be off on her own in this, subdivision. we kind of understand that what we would get would be neurotic bees, right? Like the bees are designed to live in a certain habitat that co-evolved with them. This is much like our habitat is co-evolved with us. And we have kind of casually, as our post-World War II development pattern ramped up, we've kind of casually disregarded many of those really ancient wisdoms that were passed on to us. In the book and in my talks, I tend to focus on the financial ramifications of this. I'm going to give you a couple examples now to kind of drive home some of the financial trade-offs in our post-war development model. This, again, is my hometown. These are two identical blocks. If you look at them, my office is right across the street here. My house is actually in the neighborhood just to the west. These two identical blocks were built in the 1920s. In the 1920s, this would have been the far edge of town. And so what you had in the 1920s was a development pattern that looked like the block on the left, looked like this here. A series of pop-up shacks on the far edge of town. And had things continued as they had for thousands of years, what would we have expected? Over time, those pop-up shacks would be redeveloped, torn down. You would have gotten buildings with second and third stories, stuff that was more intense, more ornate. Of course, that's not what happened. When these were built in the 1920s and the people had hopes and dreams about the future, then we had the Great Depression, we had World War II, and now we have a brand new development pattern. One that was kind of pioneered in Detroit and areas around Detroit, and then standardized and nationalized and pumped out to us as part of a national growth strategy after World War II. And so what happened is that instead of incrementally building these blocks, we just skipped right over them and started building out on the edge. And my city grew out and out and out and out. I'd like to point out, at the end of World War II, my little town was 13,500 people. Today, my little town is 13,500 people. We're 10 times the size in area. Okay? Think about that for a second. The wealth of 10,500 people now must sustain the roads, the sidewalks, the curb, the drainage systems, the pipes, the pumps, the valves, the meters, the police protection, the fire protection, the garbage pickup of an area 10 times what our ancestors did. That is an enormous financial burden. What happened to neighborhoods like these is they just stagnated. As people stopped moving to these neighborhoods because there were new opportunities we were subsidizing out on the edge, the development in this neighborhood stagnated and declined. The property values stopped rising, and when the underlying land values stop rising, that redevelopment potential goes away. And so now these properties sit and stagnate and go blighted. That's what happened to these three blocks. 2 blocks over, the city labeled it as blight. We were able to get it torn down, and now we have the new Taco John's drive-thru. I found out that you do not have Taco John's in Louisiana. That's a shame. Taco John's you can think of as like Norwegian Mexican food. It's the finest Mexican cuisine you will get.
Very spicy.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. We have, you can get mild or extra mild cheddar cheese. Ketchup is a spice at times. Yeah. So if you ever get a chance, try it. It's fantastic stuff. We've got a brand new one. This development met all the building codes and zoning codes. We got rid of a block of blight. We've now got something shiny and new. It meets all the parking requirements. It meets the sign ordinance. It's got the right floor area ratio. It's got sprinkler systems and ADA bathrooms. Everything is nice and clean and perfect about this. Everybody was thrilled about this. We got rid of blight. We got something new. How wonderful. Here's what nobody bothered to look at. That old blighted rundown block has a total value of $1.1 million. That shiny and new block, which is the same size, the same area, has the same amount of public infrastructure, essentially the same cost to us as a community to provide ongoing service and maintenance to. The total value is only $600,000. Understand what you're looking at. You're looking at the traditional pattern of development, the way we built cities for thousands of years around the world. You're looking at it as its incremental first phase after almost a century of decline and neglect. And it still outperforms by a wide, wide margin the stuff we're building brand new today. It's not even close. For those of you, I'm going to localize this a little bit. I didn't bring my Allendale Strong t-shirt, which I did order and I do have. My wife said it doesn't look good on me. She said it's the colors, but I like it anyway. When I go out to a neighborhood like that and I'm like, look at the wealth and the potential and the look at how great this neighborhood is. Sometimes people think I'm crazy. They're like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? I don't see it. These properties look blighted. They look run down. I'm like, no, you don't. You haven't done the math. You haven't looked at the underlying math. These neighborhoods are full of not only wealth and high returning for the community, but amazing, amazing potential. I'm going to go back to Memphis again, just real briefly. For those of you familiar with South Memphis is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Memphis. When I was there the first time, I met with A.C. Wharton, the mayor of Memphis, who I think he might have been from South Memphis, but whether he was or not, he had a deep passion for that neighborhood and wanted to make sure that the needs and demands of that neighborhood were given higher priority than they have been. Just for those of you that don't know South Memphis, I'll give you a sense of the poverty there. It is a viable business model if you live in South Memphis and own a car, which was most people did not, but if you did, to drive that car to the Walmart, fill up the trunk with daily essentials, toothpaste, toilet paper, that kind of thing, drive back and sell that out the back of your car to people. Because there was no place to get that stuff in the neighborhood. There was no place that you could purchase things like that. And so this was a very, very poor neighborhood. And what we did is we put together a map, and we showed in Memphis where were the neighborhoods that were producing the highest amount of wealth, the highest amount of financial productivity. What are the neighborhoods that provided the greatest value per acre? And we laid this out for Mayor Wharton, and we showed it. Number one neighborhood, South Memphis. Some of the lowest performing ones were the ones out on the edge, where the city had been subsidizing and running sewer and water and trying to get new development out there. The people who would build the big houses, they were doing all the annual annexations to try to bring new property in the city and get homes that were going to be $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. The theory was, if we could just bring enough of those in, they'll create enough wealth and money where we can go back in and take care of South Memphis. And that was actually the strategy. And the mayor, who cared deeply about South Memphis, had bought into that strategy until we showed him the map. And the reality was, in Memphis, as it is in my city, that South Memphis and the poorer neighborhoods in my community are actually subsidizing that stuff out on the edge. It's the opposite of what they thought was happening. This brings me to my second map, or my second example, which I'm going to show you, which is actually a map we put together for the city of Lafayette. I know I say it Lafayette because I grew up reading about the American Revolution, and I'm from Minnesota. They have some weird way of saying it that I hear people here also say. Lafayette or something like that. I'm like, what is that? That's a different city. So I apologize. I can try to say Lafayette, but I'll forget, and then I'll sound dumb. At least to myself. So I'm going to continue to say it my way. But you know what city I'm talking about, the one south of you. So I was invited as part of a team with a group called Urban 3 out of Asheville to go to the city and help them understand why they were perpetually broke. I saw the recent news report on your sewer system and how basically you've now discovered that your sewer system is going to cost you vastly more money than you ever imagined, as if somehow magically all this pipe just appeared in the ground. These are actually easy numbers to calculate if you sit down and calculate them. Nobody has for a long time, and that's why these numbers kind of come up and bite you and shock you. Nonetheless, in Lafayette, Louisiana, they had, and I think the burning issue there is they had a backlog of road maintenance that was somewhere around $60 million. And their annual budget for road maintenance was something like $3 million. And they sat down and they said, we could increase our budget by double, and basically we'll still be falling behind every year, adding more and more to this backlog. How is this possible? Because Lafayette, Louisiana has experienced lots of growth. They've been out annexing property. They've been out doing big projects. They've been out subsidizing this growth. How is it that we find ourselves in a position where we can't even maintain our basic core critical infrastructure? How is this possible? And so what we did is we went in Lafayette and we looked at every single expense that the city experienced. We interviewed all the departments. We went through all their records. This took a year to do, by the way. We went there 4 times for a week each time, worked on the data in between visits. So we documented, here's where all your streets are, and here's the ongoing expense. Here's where your sewer system is, and your ongoing expense, your water system. Here's your parks, and your transit, and your police protection. And we mapped these all out. We had dozens of maps showing where all these costs were. We then looked at all the revenue sources the city had. Here's where your property tax are coming from. Here's where your sales tax is coming from. Here's your utility fees. We had a bunch of different maps. And at the end of this project, we mashed all these maps together. And we said, here is your profit and loss statement for the city of Lafayette. Here it is in a map format. Every year, here's the properties that are generating more revenue for you than they cost to provide service. And here are the properties that provide more to provide ongoing service and maintenance than they're generating in revenue. That's what this map is here. Everywhere where you see blue, from the city's standpoint, this is essentially a property that is profitable. Everywhere where you see red is, from the city standpoint again, a property that is cash flow negative. Just so we're working with the big numbers here, the median family in Lafayette, Louisiana, so the median, meaning half the families pay more, half the families pay less, the median family pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city. In order for the city to maintain everything that they have built, in order for them to take care of every road, every pipe, every neighborhood, provide all the services that they promised, median family taxes, we need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 the median family makes, we need to get sent back to the city just to take care of what they've already built. That's the ramification of this development pattern that the city has adopted. Let's go through this map real quick and show you what's going on here. There's a blue area here in the middle. Blue, remember, is profitable. That is Lafayette, Louisiana's core downtown. I'm guessing that many of you have been there. I'm guessing many of you didn't go down there and start snapping photos and taking pictures of yourself for selfies. I think they're trying. It's getting better. No one says, I want to go on vacation and experience it all in downtown Lafayette. It's not exactly downtown Disney, right? They're working at it. There's a lot of good things going on. But for the eye candy test, not the best neighborhood. Financially, it's absolutely killing it. It's doing wonderful. You can see it's the most profitable place in the entire city. There's a crescent of blue. I'm going to start with my thing up here. The crescent runs through here. Those, again, are the neighborhoods that pay annually more in taxes and fees than they require in ongoing services. Those are the poorest neighborhoods in the community. Those are the shotgun shacks. Those are the places where you walk through and you're like, wow, this neighborhood's really struggling. Again, the eye test, they don't look very successful. When we were going there and going to get an Airbnb for a week, the city staff said, stay out of that neighborhood, like don't go there. Yet when we run the math and we look at the numbers, most profitable neighborhoods in the city. All this red stuff, out here on the edge, out here on the edge, up here, those are the malls, the big box stores, the strip malls, the franchise restaurants. the windy, curvy streets, the cul-de-sac-y places, the three-car garage with the attached house. All that stuff is out there in that red. I go into this in detail in the book. Let me try to explain it in a tweet of what's going on. When you grow as a city horizontally, when you annex new property, when you bring new things into the city, when a developer comes in and says, I'll spend this much money building something new, when the federal government gives you a grant to build a new highway or a frontage road, or the state government comes in and helps you extend sewer and water. What we're really, really good at in this post-war economy is new growth. And new growth benefits everybody. The federal government sees GDP go up, the state sees their tax receipts go up, the city gets permit fees and new taxes. Growth benefits everybody when it happens. It's like a sugar high. The problem is the federal government, the state government, doesn't take on the long-term liability of providing police and fire protection, of picking up all that garbage. They don't have the long-term liability of fixing the sewer and the water system when they go bad, of maintaining all those roads, of picking up all the kids who've got to ride the school bus. We have that at the local level. The catch is that the bill doesn't come due for a generation. That road doesn't fall apart for 20 or 25 years. That sewer pipe isn't going to go bad for 30 or 40 years. Those bills are way out there in the future. And so, for 2 decades, 3 decades, we get to enjoy a financial sugar high at the local level. But there's a liability sitting out there in the future for somebody else. The problem is that we live in the future of people who were in the past. When you get this newspaper article that says you have a fraction of what you need to maintain your sewer system, and everybody goes, wow, that sounds really bad. It is really bad. It was easily foreseeable. If anyone had asked the question 40 years ago, they didn't. And they didn't, and we can look back and blame them and shake our fists at them and be angry at them until we look at the agenda of our council meeting and see that we're also not asking the questions, and we're doing the same exact thing today. So this is a very human failing. A very human failing that we see in Shreveport, we see in Memphis, we see in Brainerd, we see everywhere. Because we are all human. We all suffer from this same human failing. Psychologists actually have a word for this. It's called temporal discounting or cognitive discounting. It's why people smoke. It's why you'll go home and sit on the couch and watch a sporting event and eat a bowl of ice cream instead of going for a walk or exercising, right? I'm not going to get heart disease. I'm not going to get lung cancer. I'm not going to get, and then oops. Wish I could redo the last 40 years. That's human. We all share this. This is what it looks like when it's given a huge budget at the city level. This is what it looks like. How do we get out of this? Or how do we, I think get out of this is the wrong term. How do we start to address this? And this is where I want to talk a little bit of finance with you and have you think strategically about how we make public investments. Because we started this whole conversation with, we got money from the state, we're going to run sewer and water out to the edge of town. Isn't this going to be great for everybody? How do we think more strategically than that? What I'm going to have you think about is looking at the city as a banker would look at it, and then looking at it as a venture capitalist would look at it. They're two different mindsets. What is a banker mindset? A banker mindset is one of very, essentially, low risk with steady returns. Bankers are inherently, and don't think of like Wall Street bankers who are gambling with your money. I'm talking about like your local banker who actually can't gamble with your money. They are inherently conservative people. Local banking is a very, very conservative undertaking. There's a saying in the local banking business that they follow the 3-6-3 model. You borrow money at 3%, you loan it out at 6%, and then you get out on the golf course by 3 p.m. It's a very boring business model. Anybody who has gone in and tried to get a loan when they desperately needed one knows that bankers do not take risks. You can only get a loan if you really don't need it. Okay? That's because banking is ultimately a very conservative type of approach. We do not want to lose any money, period. This is very different than a venture capitalist. Very, very different than a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists are willing to take high risks because they're not looking for steady gains, they're looking for huge gains. They're looking for moonshot kind of gains. A venture capitalist will say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to take 10 companies that I think have a huge upside potential. And I'm going to invest a little bit in each of those companies. Now, I've got a big nest egg I'm going to keep over here, but the money I can afford to lose, I'm going to invest in 10 different companies. And I know when I do this that of the 10, 2 or 3 of them are just going to flame out and fail. They're going to be complete losers. Another maybe 3 or 4 of them will make a little bit of money, but not really enough to justify the level of risk that I'm taking here. But 1 or 2, or if I'm really lucky, 3 of these companies are going to go crazy. They're going to turn $1 into 1,000. And I'm going to be filthy rich. Not because I'm a genius, because I didn't pick the 3, but because I was strategic. I picked a portfolio of 10, hoping I would land 1 or 2 or maybe 3 of these. I don't know from day one which 3 of the 10 are going to work. I just know that some of them will. That's a venture capital mentality. Many of us have savings. And many of us, through our employer or what have you, have retirement savings. And if you've ever gone and set up one of these retirement accounts or some type of brokerage account, they'll walk you through a process to help you gauge your level, your comfort level with risk, right? You go through these questions and they'll ask you a series of questions, and the correct answer is always medium. Do you want to put all your money into biogenetic tech stocks, or would you rather invest in money market? Medium. Do you want to take your money to the casino, or would you rather bury it in the backyard? Medium. And medium feels right for us, right? It feels very human. I'm not a prude. I'm not going to bury my money in the backyard. I want to get some type of return, but I'm not going to gamble and take a big risk, so I'm not going to put it in something that could flame out. I want something that is medium. Here's the thing. On Wall Street, you are known as the sucker at the card table. The medium portfolio is the portfolio for losers. And I'm not saying that as myself. I'm saying that that's what the people on Wall Street call you. Losers. If you are a strategic investor, you don't go for medium. What you do is you split your allocation between a banker mentality and a venture capital mentality. Understand what you've done when you do this. And I'm going to put some numbers up here of what I would recommend for a city. If you put 95% of your money into a banker mentality, what you are saying is that the most I will ever lose in my portfolio is 5%. The most that I will ever go down is 5%. I will not tolerate losses greater than that. And in fact, on the 5%, because it's steady returns, I'm just going to have a nice steady grind off that 5%. That's the most I'm going to lose. But I'm going to take my 5%, my other part of the barbell here, the other end, the high risk end of the strategy, and I'm going to put that as a venture capitalist. And if all of those lose, I lose 5%. But if a couple of them do really well, I can double, triple, quadruple my portfolio overnight. Do you see what we've done here? We've given ourselves the maximum upside potential with the minimum amount of downside risk. This is a really strategic development portfolio. All right, let's apply this now to a city. I want you to think first like a banker. We're going to back up. We're going to go back to Lafayette, Louisiana. If you are a banker and you're going to invest 90% of your public portfolio, your capital improvements projects, the money you're going to spend year after year after year, if you're going to invest that like a banker in the city of Lafayette, where do those investments go? The blue areas. And what do those investments look like? They look like basic maintenance. Go out there and fix the sidewalk. Go out there and pull the weeds. Keep the street lights on. Take care of the cracks. Fix the streets. Make sure people can get around. Basic maintenance. That's what it looks like. It's not glamorous. It's not glitzy. It's not going to win you some award from some, American Planning Association magazine. It's just taking care of business. That's what it looks like. And look at these neighborhoods now. They all suffer from decline and neglect. Imagine what they would be like if we just gave them a base level of love and respect. What would that be like? It would be amazing. Amazing. These are places that are subsidizing and generating wealth for the entire community. If we're going to think strategically like bankers, we're going out and we're just taking care of them. And again, to localize it here, Allendale should never suffer from lack of basic maintenance on the public side. Never. Never. Neither should your core downtown. All right. Where are your venture capital investments? This is what I'm going to walk you through now. I'm going to walk you through it from my community, but I think you're going to see some parallels for where you're at. When I first published that thing about the Taco John's, the old and blended block versus the shiny and new, I live in a small town. People got really angry with me. Understand, my cousin runs the local economic development authority that got this project in. I have another cousin who is a manager at the Taco John's. Yeah, so family reunions are very awkward, exactly. Yeah. And the pushback that I got is, Chuck, if you're so smart, what would you have done? Taco John's comes in, they want the whole block, they're willing to build. If you were so smart, what would you have done? Would you have said no to Taco John's? And the reality is I would have said no to Taco John's, but I would be like 1 out of 1,000 people who would have said no to Taco John's. The broad community consensus was, this is an improvement. And so the question that I struggle with is, what would I have done? And it took me a long time to reject the premise of the question. Because the premise of the question was, as this neighborhood cycles through increasing levels of decline and despair, what would you have done? And the reality is I reject the premise that these neighborhoods should go through cycles of decline and despair. And so a group of people in my community and I went out, and we spent a year in this neighborhood trying to identify things we could do to get the neighborhood moving in a different direction. We did things like, we held a block party, we did a scavenger hunt, we had different things to get people out talking to each other, but mostly we wanted them to talk to us. We spent a lot of time just being in this neighborhood, walking with people, experiencing the neighborhood with them. Can I walk with you today? Yes. Well, talk to me about where you came from. Where are you going? What is this trip that you're on? Why is it necessary? Why are you doing it right now? Talk to me about how this street makes you feel. Are you scared here? Is this good? Like what we were trying to just understand the neighborhood from the perspective of the people who experienced it day after day after day. And after being out there for a year, we put together a report that we called Neighborhoods First that identified 8 things the city could do right now that we had prototyped and tested that they could go out and do right now to make this neighborhood a little bit better. And the idea was, if we can signal to people that this neighborhood is going to get better, and get better, and get better, we can not only change the trajectory of decline, but we actually will get private capital off the sidelines. Because there's a lot of people who live in this neighborhood who, yes, they're very poor, but if you live in this neighborhood, why would you invest in your house? Why would you go out, unless you're Rosie, unless you're like this beautiful person who cares like deeply about a neighborhood, why would you go out and build a nice garden? Why would you maintain you know for a fact that next year your property is going to be worth less than it is this year because the city is completely neglecting this neighborhood. Why would you go out and make investments that are going to lose you money? Why? So we said, if we can shift the trajectory of this, we can get all this wealth of capital, human capital, off the sidelines and put it to work making this neighborhood a better place. So here's our 8 projects. And I'm going to orient you with the neighborhood a little first before I zoom in. So here's the Taco John's down here. Here's the Old and Blended block. There's my office down here. The neighborhood I live in is right up here. So this is Northeast Brainerd. This is the old mall. I say the old mall because we now have the new mall and then the big box strip. So the new big box strip. This is where, just for timing, this is where I sat on Santa's lap. There's no Santa there anymore. That was at the new mall. My kids sat on Santa's lap, and now today I don't know what they do. This is the old paper mill up here. This is a school right here that my mom went to, I went to, and my kids went to. And so these streets right here are kind of like the thoroughfares through the neighborhood. So let's zoom in on these. Project number 1, this is what the street looks like. This is the main east-west street through the neighborhood. For some reason, the city has decided that every neighborhood needs an arterial street, so it needs a fast through lane through the middle of the street. If you look at the cross-section here, these are really 14-foot wide lanes. These are huge highway-scaled lanes. People speed through this neighborhood. They drive really, really fast. We went out and did a speed study, which we just took a radar gun that you can use to do how fast a baseball is being thrown. We got a hold of one of those, and we went out, and we found that 2 out of 3 cars went over the speed limit on this street. When we talked to people, they said, we stay away from this street because of the fast traffic. I tell my kids not to go here. We don't walk here. We stay away. We stay off of the street because of how fast things are going. We went out in the middle of the night, and with chalk, we chalked in for a few block stretch, narrower lanes. You see there's no pavement markings out here now. They don't maintain them. They've all gone away, and nobody puts them back in. We went out with chalk, and we chalked them in. And then we did another speed study. And what we found was that in the same 2-hour period that we had done the prior one, we just did it a week later, only 1 car out of nearly 300 went over the speed limit. Having that little bit of extra edge friction, a little bit more constrained driving surface, slowed speeds dramatically. Dramatically. And so our first recommended project is go out and just paint in some narrower lanes. Take paint and just paint in narrower lanes. That would make the street traffic slower, and it would make the neighborhood a lot more livable, make it easier for people to cross, safer for people to be in. You could give this extra space over to bikes. You don't have to. The most important thing is just narrow up the lanes. Perpendicular to this, then, is the north-south street. This is First Avenue. First Avenue, when I show this, people are like, wow, you got light rail. No, we have an abandoned rail spur. There's no icon for abandoned rail spur, so you get light rail. But basically, there's a line that runs through the middle of the street. They used to run out to our paper mill from the rail yard. Again, 16-foot driving lanes plus this extra space here. These are massive, massive lanes. Same kind of concept. Let's narrow up the lanes with paint. Let's create some edge friction. Here, though, because there's no sidewalks at all, we said let's create some human space out here on the edge, and let's try to get the cars to park out a little bit so that the cars actually can create kind of a safe area or like a buffer so people can walk on one side of the car and then drive on the other side of the car. So there's a little bit more spacing and things will feel a little bit safer and actually be a little bit safer. One of the things that we experienced was that most of the foot traffic was going to the grocery/pharmacy in the neighborhood where that old mall is. The old mall is now not a mall, but part of it is a grocery store on the end. And people, there's a grocery store right there. People would walk through here, and cars coming along here, drivers would be going very, very fast through here. This was kind of a dangerous crossing. In front of the store is this cross-hatching in paint. The store's actually gone out and put this paint in, and it kind of denotes to people that, hey, people are going to be crossing here kind of random places. Again, we said, let's go do that thing here. Let's take that same concept that they tested over there, seems to work, let's just bring it here. We have people already who are crossing here. What we want to do is just alert people that, hey, there's people crossing, be on the lookout, be aware. Just south of here is another crossing. So there were really 2 where we saw like a flood of people coming through on foot. This one, again, was really, really dangerous. Cars were going very fast across here. This one didn't work well for the cross-hatching, but we did go out in the middle of the night, and with duct tape, we tested out a crosswalk. And we put orange flags on both sides. I realize some people don't like this. They're like, it's demeaning to have to carry an orange flag. I agree with you. It's also safer. And when we put in the orange flags, people said, we appreciated them. We sat there and we walked across with them. We interviewed them. We talked to them. They said, this really helps. It makes us feel safer. Makes us feel like we're seen more. We talked to some people in the vehicles, and they said the same thing. We watched how people reacted, and it seemed to be a big improvement. And so we recommended putting a crosswalk in here and then keeping those orange flags on the side. When we cross over that then, same street, but once you cross with the crosswalk, you get to this wide area. This is a commercial street, so we have a commercial street standard, which means you have to build it so wide. The assumption behind this is that there'll be parking on the side. Of course, then they also require huge parking lots, and so no one parks on the street. So what you wind up with is these two drag strips. And the traffic goes very, very fast down here. There's not much of it, but it's very fast. You can see the curve radius here is huge. So what happens is these small cars would come flying around the corner, and we actually saw people out there who were just walking, and all of a sudden a car would come flying around the corner, and they would jump into the snowbank to get off the roadway. What we said is, let's just take the top 10 feet and give it over to people walking. Let's just put a double white line in there. You still have massive amounts of space for vehicles. I mean, you still have like two 20-foot lanes. It's ridiculous. This is like 50 feet wide of pavement. Let's give the northern 10 feet over to people walking. Let's just make that like a kind of a car-free zone and let that be their space and make it a little bit safer for them to traverse through this area. This is the park on the north side of town. This is what it looks like from the neighborhood looking north into the park. One of the things that we heard, and one of the things that we, this kind of a neighborhood thing, was that a lot of nefarious activity went on in this park. There was talk of people selling drugs and doing other things. The police department said, maybe we should go put some cameras out here, do some extra patrols. We said, let's just trim up these trees. Part of the natural kind of policing of a neighborhood is to be able to have eyes on the street. People's houses in this neighborhood were they were the older style, so they faced the street. They had openings up on the street. They had windows on the street. And so the way you police a neighborhood naturally like that is you have these things open onto the street, and you just keep it clear of stuff. You maintain things so that people can see out there. And if people can see out there, people generally don't do nefarious activity there. So we said, let's just go out and trim up those trees. Once you get to the other side, this is what the park looks like. The park is very neglected, not well maintained. Outside of scheduled softball games, we never saw a kid in this park the entire year. The neighborhood's full of kids. Kids are all over. They go to the school usually and play in the playground there, but none of them would go to this park. We said, let's go plant some trees. This is a long-term project. We can't fix this park overnight, but the one thing we can get started now that will pay off decades from now is to get some trees started. Let's go plant some in this outfield and put a nice buffer into that failed industrial site. And let's go plant some shade trees where someday someone can sit back here and watch a softball game in the comfort of the shade. Our last project then was this neighborhood street here. One of the things we noticed about this street was that, and I'll say it this way, if this neighborhood is going to see a renaissance, where the properties become more valuable, the neighborhood becomes a better place to live, it's most likely to happen starting with this street. The houses along this street were kind of in the original traditional form. Other streets, a lot of them have been torn down, and then you get these apartment buildings that don't fit into the neighborhood or respect the neighborhood at all. This building retained a lot of the old architecture. The buildings opened onto the street. They faced the street. You can look at the street and see it's got good proportions. We had one streetcar in town that ran from the mill to the downtown. It actually went down this street. And so this street kind of kept the proportions of that investment. So you've got sidewalks, you've got boulevard with trees, and you've got a nice slow traffic driving lane with great architecture along it. The one thing that this street really lacks are street trees. In the late 1980s, we had Dutch elm disease come through and wipe out a whole bunch of trees. It's the city's policy not to plant trees, not to put trees in. The maintenance people don't like them. The public works people don't like them. Trees get in the way. We pointed out to people that trees create enormous amount of value. There's a study out of, and I'm going to insert a city's name here. Don't react to it. Let me talk you through it a little bit. There's a study out of Portland, Oregon, that says in Portland neighborhoods, every street tree you have raises the value of property by $9,000. That's Portland. We're not Portland. We're a very different place. But even if it raises it by $900, which I think is probably a reasonable thing, the street tree costs much less than that. Let's go put them in. What we have found is that street trees are the highest returning financial investment that a city can make. When we put in a street tree, the amount of financial return we get based on compared to what we spend is enormous. And so we went out and counted 75 missing trees in the streetscape. And we said, let's go out and replant them. So here's our 8 projects. Let's go back to that original sewer and water expansion project. The city came up with their share. It's about $1.4 million. The state kicked in their portion. The city then, agreed to do the project. We got the money. We're going forward with it. What we found was that the groundwater conditions were terrible out here. The soil conditions were horrible. And we got a really bad contractor in our low bid environment. The final project cost, when we got all done with a year and a half of construction, a bunch of change orders, litigation, $13.5 million. Understand that the difference is all being paid for now by my neighbors, by the people who live in my community. That was the risk that we took on when we did this project. So the project's in. It's been in for a couple of years now. There's been no new development, now that it's in, so to speak. But we do have this big bill that we're paying now every month because we had to take on a huge amount of debt to finish it off. Here's what our 8 projects cost. Wow. $16,700. What happens if we go out and in a venture capital mindset, we humbly observe where people struggle. We come up with small projects to incrementally address those struggles. And we go out in this neighborhood and we spend $16,700 trying to make the neighborhood a little bit better, trying to get private capital and energy off the sidelines, trying to get this neighborhood moving in a different direction. What happens if we spend $16,700 and nothing happens? Well, we're out $16,700. We have a $9 million budget. That's money we can afford to lose. And here's the great thing. We just learned 8 projects that didn't work. Let's go out next year and try 8 more. And 8 more after that. And 8 more after that. But I feel like we've got it right here. I feel like we're on the right track. Because we did go out and observe where people struggle. We did humble ourselves and say, we don't know the answer. Let's try things. Let's try to figure it out. We did prototype these things with our energy at very low dollar amounts. These are things we can do, not just in Northeast Brainerd, but in neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood, to try to move them incrementally to that next level of intensity. This is how we think like venture capitalists. This is how we make investments in a city that respond to the needs of people who are there, their needs today. This requires us to reorient ourselves. Instead of, as a city, looking at what the new developer can bring in, instead of looking at what new place we can annex, instead of looking at what's the big project we can get the state or the federal government to subsidize, what we are doing instead is shifting our gaze to intently focus on the real needs of people in our communities, where their struggles are, where their difficulties are. And by focusing on that, it feels a little bit, and we're in a church, it feels a little bit like church work, like social work. But I'm telling you, if we are just in it for the dollar, that's all we care about. This is how you make great financial investments. This is how we build cities that are strong, financially, resilient, productive. This is essentially the traditional development pattern that co-evolved way of building cities that people from around the world for thousands of years did. And this is why their cities endured. Jane Jacobs, who is revered by planners, and rightly so, made this statement that I'm going to close with. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. This idea of co-creation is such an important one to bend in with humility, responding to it in an incremental way. This is how we, together, through local governments, serve each other. And serve each other in a way that not only is going to be guaranteed to make people's lives better, but also improve our bottom line. And that is the essence of what a Strong Downs approach is all about. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
If you would like to stay, I am happy to stay for a little bit longer and answer any questions or have any discussion that you would like. I do have to go at 8 because tomorrow morning I've got a meeting bright and early with a whole bunch of people who want to talk the same stuff. So please, go ahead. You have the microphone to pass around?
Chuck, to your the numbers that you were using in the Latin example of the profit and loss, do those include sales tax numbers?
Yes.
And do you have an opinion about whether or not the greater and greater propensity for local governments to be based on sales tax revenues as opposed to property tax revenues has an impact on some of these, what we're experiencing in development process in the way that you described it?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. The sales tax in general, it is, if you are a local government, if you're a taxpayer, it's so seductive. Because for a tax that is difficult to perceive as a payer, you can raise enormous amounts of money. And so what happens is that cities generally like sales taxes because they can, with modest adjustments to rates, raise a ton of money. Here's the downside of the sales tax. Especially at the local government level, it is incredibly distorting. Incredibly distorting. And think of it this way. What is the best city you can have in a city with sales tax? It's a city where you have all the big box stores and malls and retail establishments, but no residents. Residents are a net negative in a sales tax city. The best thing to do is to have all the industry and all the retail, and then have all the people live out here in some other city. And just come and shop in your place. Because from a profit and loss margin, you're making tons of money, and you got no expenses from those pesky people. What we really need, and what we really want, and we talk about this a lot at Strong Towns, is a model that provides us feedback. And feedback is often positive feedback, like this is going really well, so your tax revenues go up and you feel really good. But along with positive feedback comes painful feedback. If the thing isn't working, we want to know that early. If we're building more sewer systems than we can afford to maintain, it would have been nice to have the pain of that experience 30 or 40 years ago when the problem was actually manageable, as opposed to have it be experienced today when the problem is so out of control that good people are going to suffer as we try to fix this. And so the sales tax is essentially an anti-feedback kind of tax. It's a tax that divorces us and our actions from the direct feedback of our actions. And so what we always talk about, or what I always recommend to cities that are predominantly sales tax, is that you have to be really, really disciplined about the math. Because your propensity is going to be that you're going to feel richer than you are, and you're going to overextend yourself. Let me also tell you one other thing about sales tax. When we model these things, and your beginning question was, did you count sales tax in Lafayette? Yes, we did. And everyone says, well, the Walmart is really great, right? Okay, my method, which Walmart? The Walmart in place now, or the two that were abandoned? Because the two that were abandoned, you're getting no sales tax from. They just sit there, by the way, rigged with sewer and water and roadway that you have to maintain. Okay? The new one is sitting there, and no, it's not positive. It is negative. It is deeply negative. And understand why it's deeply negative. First of all, you have an enormous amount of investment in infrastructure in it. You might be getting a lot of sales tax from the Walmart. You can go to any of those downtown places, the little mom and pop places that are kind of struggling. You're like, wow, these places aren't doing that good. You can go to that old and blended block I showed you. Well, these places aren't doing very good. Yeah, but they all have like 15 feet of infrastructure. You don't have to have a big return to be able to sustain that. You go to Walmart and you've got 1.5 miles of pipe around that building. You've got to generate a ridiculous amount of return to make that pay for itself. And so the Walmarts are all cash flow negative. That's what we find everywhere we model. Let me tell you something else about Walmart. A good friend of mine, Joe Minicozy, the guy who runs Urban 3, his company does those maps, those 3D maps. Him and I were at a conference of assessors. So you get the assessor come out and say how much your property is worth, and then that's where your taxes are tied to. The head of Walmart's property tax division was at this conference and gave a session. And it was really brilliant on his part, because the session was, he was talking to all the assessors. Assessors are as close as you get to nonpartisan bean counters you can get. They're not coming out trying to rig numbers. They're like, what's this place worth? And then here's what your taxes are. It's a very clean profession. And so this guy went in and said, look, you are all over the country assessing our Walmarts as if we're building really good buildings. The buildings we build are junk. They're really cheap. They're really poorly assembled. Their cost per square foot is very low. And so value our buildings less. Instead of saying the building's worth $10 million, it's actually worth more like $2 million. Our taxes should go down by 80%. And you look at all these assessors, and they're saying they're running, okay, that makes sense. Then, my friend Joe, who's an instigator, got up and said, all right, can I ask you a question? How long does your Walmart building last? And the guy from Walmart was, well, that's easy. We amortize them out over 12 years. And so after 12 years, we've essentially paid off the building. And then we can decide, do we close it and move on to a new place, or do we put another 5 years into it? Every time we go through that cycle, when we get further out, moving is more likely. And so we're not building buildings to last, we're building buildings basically to throw away. Now, let's put this in the perspective again of the community. We're putting in an investment in the ground, sewer, water, road, curb, all this stuff, that is an eternal investment. It lasts forever. And when it falls apart, we are expected to go out and fix it and maintain it on our cash base. And the partner that we have in this is saying, I'm going to stick around 12 years. Please. Who's got the mic? I'll let you pick. It's easier if I don't have to.
I was wondering, what are your thoughts about our sales tax exemption, or sorry, our homestead tax exemption in Louisiana, which is really statewide, the $75,000 exemption. Is it good? Should it be adjusted up or down?
I would be talking out of line if I said I had strong thoughts on it. I understand what a property tax exemption is, and I think the place I've experienced the most is in Detroit, because Detroit has a pretty generous in terms of number of properties that qualify, not generous in terms of dollar amount. Property tax exemption, and it is designed essentially to acknowledge that there are some people who are barely making it, who have very cheap property, very low value property, and that piling tax onto them is going to lead to foreclosures and kick them out of their home, and we have more important things to do, and the revenue we're raising is not that significant. That's what they experience in Detroit. I think as a general correlation, Obviously, there's a lot of poverty in Louisiana. I don't say that with any judgment. It's as a reality. I think what you have decided, for very good reasons, is that we are going to exempt people who are living in, who own property that would be considered at those levels. We're going to exempt them from the property tax. And I guess as like a social statement, I'm not going to argue with that. I think where it gets to be problematic, and let's go out to a state like California, where they've done something similar, but not at like a 75,000 or below range. They've said we're basically going to freeze property tax increases across the board. So, wherever you start is ultimately where you're going to be, plus like a cost of living adjustment. You take that out for 3-4 decades, and they've created a monster system where now many homes are owned by LLCs so that you can transfer properties from person to person without resetting tax structures. And you have multimillionaires living in homes that would sell for $10 million that are paying taxes on them as if they're $200,000 homes. I don't think you have that here. So it's a different policy. As a general rule, how do I say this? As a general rule, I am in favor of cities having a broader toolbox to set their own local tax rates and structures. We decided largely in the 70s and 80s, and every state pretty much went through this, where we were going to take that authority away from cities and we were going to invest it in states. So now, the state sets that requirement, 75,000. That means in the poorest neighborhoods of New Orleans and in the wealthiest neighborhoods of Baton Rouge, they're treated the exact same. And I would stand here and say, Shreveport is a very different city than New Orleans. It's a very different city than Baton Rouge. It's a very different city. And you should be able to set your own local rates to make that work for you. And if you did that here locally and said 75,000 is where we want to be, I would respect that. I have difficulty when the state does it because it's not really responding to you and where you're at.
Chuck? And your...
I'm gonna let him decide. So, because I'm a Minnesotan, I can't pick.
So nice.
Yeah.
Chuck, in your example, you used about Lafayette.
Yeah.
And how did the city fathers, politicians, business leaders, etc., react to their mapping?
I'll give you 2 guesses. So here's the interesting thing. I don't know if any of you know Joey Durrell, who was the mayor at the time, Mayor Durrell. I like him a lot. He is a very smart guy. He's a good leader. The thing that kind of prompted this whole thing was that they had gone for a sales tax increase to do transportation. And then it got voted down by taxpayers, by stingy, no good taxpayers who won't cough up money. And I'm like, these taxpayers are smart. They know that this is a bottomless pit. Like, what do you mean? Of course I wouldn't vote for this. And so in talking to him, he said, we need these tools to be able to communicate this. And the funny thing about Lafayette has term limits on their mayor and council members. And they have this tradition, I'm gonna say this here among friends again. They have a tradition that you don't raise taxes until your term limited out. And on your way out, then you can carry the burden of raising taxes because you're not going to run for re-election, ostensibly. And so he was kind of doing his duty, and it didn't work out. So he was done. And he said, I want to leave this as basically like the conversation. I want to fix this. I want to get them on the right track. So we put this out, and it was at the end of the year before an election year. And then the conversation kind of went into the election year. So it would have been about right now and over the next couple of months in 2016, I think. Might have been 2014. Time flies. The existing council members, the existing staff, the existing people within the government, really reacted to it well. They're like, okay, you're explaining something to me I didn't get. I can see it now graphically. I can understand it. I can get it. This is going to be difficult to communicate, but I'm glad I've got this tool to communicate it. The people running for office ran against it. And I actually had people who said that we were trying to attack their way of life. We were trying to undermine their existence. We were, anti-car, anti-whatever, anti-success. And we kept going back. I kept going back, and people were like, this is just the math. Like, if you see an error in our math, show us. But we're not. The one thing that made the papers and was in a bunch of campaign literature is Chuck Marohn was saying that we need to increase taxes by, it was 1,500 and 9,200, so I can't remember what tax increase it was like. We need to increase the taxes by 5,000% or something insane thing. And this is the guy that, if you vote for my opponent, he's all with this guy saying, we need this huge tax increase. And the reality is that I said, if you want to maintain what you've already built, here's the tax increase it would take. You're not going to do that, so let's have a conversation about A, not building anymore, and B, what we do about all the stuff you've already got. That never got through. The funny thing is, this is probably the wrong word, so I apologize. I'll use a Minnesotaism. The interesting thing is, once the new council took office and the realities were presented to them, the dialogue shifted. And even though they ran on, and I'm not trying to be political here, but they ran on very low tax, low government intervention, build more roads platform, the reality of the situation quickly made that shift. These are human discussions. It's very freaky. If you went back in Detroit 40 years ago and said to people living in neighborhoods, the city over the next few decades is going to walk away from your neighborhood. They're not going to maintain your road. They're not going to maintain your pipe. You're going to call for police and fire protection and no one's going to show up for an hour. They would not have believed you. And they would have said, no, that won't happen.
Right here.
I actually have a very simple question.
I'll make the answer long and complicated.
Great. On your A projects, I don't know how long ago you did them, but I was wondering, are you seeing some of the money come off the sidelines in the areas that you did these projects from people that are living in the neighborhoods? Are you seeing positive outcomes?
Nope. You know why? We're never done. So, here's the thing. There's a city, Oswego, New York, that has embraced this, that has done this over and over. And Oswego, New York has seen massive increases in value because of this. They're the case study I would point to as success. In my city, we presented this report. We brought this up. We talked to people about it. And the city staff showed up, and they had their, I was just going to say slide rules, although they're not that old. Almost. They had all the reasons why they couldn't do any of these projects. None of them. They're all bad. We can't do any of them. And they basically gave the council a cover for not doing any of them. And the report was laughed at by the chamber president. You should go read it. It's called, if you just type in Strong Towns Neighborhoods First, you'll read this report. It's very impressive. You will like it. It's a good report. They hated it. And they went so far as to say, because we named our group A Better Brainerd. Yeah, they were offended by that. They're like, Brainerd's already better. And I'm like, okay, well, we can make it better than better. They actually wanted me to stop using Brainerd in the name because I didn't have a right to use the name Brainerd in the name of my group. And I'm like, what about like Brainerd Motors or Brainerd Car Wash or Brainerd whatever? Like that. So it was a very personal thing. And let me give them a little bit more respect. I was not When I published the Taco John's thing, I did not, I did it in a Minnesota way, so you all would say, oh, that was respectful. And Minnesotans would be like, wow, what a jerk. So I had thrown some elbows, so they were not inclined to like me very much. And so there was a human reaction that couldn't get to the substance of it. In subsequent years, I have been able to work with some other people to get the worst people voted off the council, and we have some new, really good people on the council. And they've taken up some of this, but not the 8 projects that we recommended.
Okay, can I have a follow-up then? That's good. So here's my follow-up.
Yeah.
So in Memphis,
Yeah.
people just came off, out of the woodwork and did that project. It wasn't really the government, as I understood
It wasn't.
All right, and in the city that you said this is being successful,
Oswego.
I'm betting that that's probably the same case?
It started with a nonprofit, but the government has gotten involved and been proactive. It's kind of the same in Memphis, where the government was a late comer to the game, but it's now become a partner.
Okay, so in a city, let's say Shreveport,
Yeah.
let's assume that our government is
Yeah.
going to be the latecomer.
They will.
How do you get it started in the community? Where do you see the grassroots?
Yeah.
What types of groups, what types of people? How do you get it moving?
It's a really good question. I'm gonna answer that lamely and not up to the quality that it should, because I'm an engineer and a planner and a deep introvert who doesn't do these things well. The people that I see do them well have a mix of personality types that really amaze me and impress me. If you go to, if you check out the Better Block movement out of Dallas, so you could go visit them. What's the neighborhood in Dallas where the Better Block Foundation is from? The Bishop Arts District. And Deep Ellum, too. This guy, very full of this stuff. When I go hang out with these guys, I'm just astounded. Because they're extroverts, they're fun, they're bringing in all these people from all over, they're building all this momentum. Here's the thing, your community has people like that. I don't know who they are, I don't know where they are. The reason that I've come back here now for the 4th time is because every time I come, more people show up. And the first time I was here, there was like 40 people. Then there's like 100 people. And we're having more and more people show up, and my hope is, or my thought is, that will emerge from your conversation. I think what we can do as residents, and the reason why governments have a hard time leading this, is because if the government goes out and starts temporarily painting crosswalks and trimming up trees and planting street trees, and they're saying, we're going to experimentally invest $16,000 in this neighborhood, what will happen is my dad will show up at the next meeting, and he'll be like, I got potholes here, I got this, why are you out here doing this silly stuff? And he'll make a big stink, and the paper will put him on the front page being a jerk. And so the city won't do it, because they're afraid of the feedback from my dad. So what has to happen, what we have to do, if we're not the person who's going to go out and lead this, which most of us are not, when the person does, we need to be the human shield for them. So when my dad shows up at the council meeting to complain, someone has to get up after him and say, look, I'm with him. And here's what it did, and here's why it's better, and I'm with him. And another person has to stand up and say that too. So we got to give these people cover, in a sense.
Let's take one more question.
Okay. One more? All right.
Would you address or talk about annexation, the pluses, the minuses, and the reality and sustainability?
When I talk about annexation, the pluses, we get a sugar high of financial growth. The minuses, we get a big, deep financial hangover from all the commitments that we've made. Your last one was sustainability, but you had another.
Reality.
The reality, yeah. Let me go back to Memphis again, because I think Memphis is a really good example of getting yourself into a lot of trouble with annexations. And I see this here a little bit, but Memphis is really like, in a sense, the outlier there are a couple gradations beyond what you have done even here. Memphis had this practice, let's call it, let's be generous and call it a practice, where at the end of the year, and this went on for decades, they would have a budget gap for the coming year's budget. Let's say it's $500,000 or $1 million, whatever the budget gap was. They'd say, here's our budget gap. We don't have enough money coming in next year to meet this gap. We could cut some things, but really we want to raise more money. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out, and in order to raise this money, here's how much land we need to annex. And so they would go out and they would annex that land in like December of the year. They're going to bring that in. And so we can count on our budget the revenue from that land. But we don't have to count the expenses on that until the following budget. So for 1 year, we get all the revenue from that, but none of the expense. And as part of the annexation, we'll promise someday we'll bring sewer and water out there, we'll provide city services, da 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 da. Well, of course, then we get to the end of the next year, and what will happen? It's a bigger budget gap. And so we got to have a bigger amount of land. Memphis, if you look at Detroit, and Detroit's often been called like just a ratio problem. There's too much land and not enough people. Okay? Memphis is 2/3 the number of people of Detroit. So it's a third smaller in population. It is almost 3 times the area of Detroit. Yes. Whatever math problem you have in Detroit that's caused this insolvency, Memphis has it huge. You, I think, are closer to Memphis than Detroit in that math problem.
We're 1/3 the population, but the same square miles basically.
Okay.
20
okay.
square miles smaller than Detroit.
Oh, okay.
But
So
1/3 the
but a third of the population, right. So Memphis closed their immediate budget gap by creating this massive long-term problem. The reality, obviously, is that math doesn't work. It reached a point of absurdity where they would be a decade out, and they had provided the services they promised, and there was no way to provide them. And like, this will never ever happen. And so they were actually, in a sense, defaulting on the immediate problem, the immediate promise they made. Not to mention the ones where they had installed the sewer and water had this huge spread out development pattern and could never ever go back and fix it when it fell apart. And so what Memphis did, and this was A.C. Warren started this, and the new mayor, I can't remember the name of the mayor, I apologize, has continued and expanded on it. They said they froze their annexations, no more annexations. And that was like 2014 or 2015. No more, we're done, no more annexations. I would highly recommend you do that as well. Just a blanket statement. Your city is so huge geographically, there is no financially beneficial annexation you could possibly do today. Period. That's a blanket statement that I will make, and I would bet large amounts of money on that. There's no long-term financially beneficial annexation you could possibly do here. So Memphis froze their annexations, no more. Now, for the last couple of years, they've actually been going through a de-annexation process, actually shrinking the size of the city. They've been going to the neighborhoods that they brought in and said, yeah, we'll give you sewer and water, we'll provide all these services. They've been going back to them like, look, you've been paying city taxes for a decade. We're no closer to getting you these services. It's not going to happen. Would you like to not be in the city anymore? And a lot of them are saying, yes. Here's the brave, courageous thing about Memphis. The gut reaction of many people, because largely these are rich neighborhoods that now they're letting out of the city. It's like, well, why are we letting go all the rich people? Aren't they paying taxes? Aren't they generating the revenue? And it's been very painful and difficult to explain that, no, this actually makes us financially better off. And it's so counterintuitive to the way we think about things, but they're actually going through now and systematically de-annexing, they're shrinking the size of the city. When I look at Shreveport, your annexation policy to date has been, let's say unsustainable. I think that would be a kind way to put it. It's been reckless, It's been not really thought through. It's really been disrespectful to not only people being brought in, but to future generations. And I think if I were to make an annexation recommendation to you, the immediate thing would be to just stop. Like, stop annexing property in the city. There's no good reason to do it. And then you have to have a deep conversation about how do we unwind some of these obligations in a way that is humane, compassionate, and respectful. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
I think I heard you saying earlier in your presentation that a big project downtown wouldn't be good right now. There's a lot of southeast Shreveport, my area of town, that would like to de-annex. They think they'd be better off. Should we wait until they de-annex, they see where we are, and then talk about maybe a bigger building?
I don't know.
They want to go, shouldn't we let them?
My sense would be, without all the supporting details, if you said we can make the city smaller today, should we do that? My gut would say yes. Especially if it was property that was brought in the last 40 or 50 years, you're almost guaranteed to be cash flow ahead. I think, though, for me, I tend to think about your big project thing. Understand, I hope the takeaway from this presentation tonight is that if the city, on behalf of the community, is going to be doing projects and making investments in capital projects, it should be of two varieties. One variety should be strictly maintenance, and maintenance of high productivity neighborhoods, which you can think of Allendale as like an example of a high productivity neighborhood. The downtown is another. I'm talking about basic maintenance. That should be almost all of your capital budget. The rest of it should be venture capital, small incremental bets, observing where people struggle, and then trying to get local private capital and energy off the sidelines. That should be all we do. So, like big projects, like we're going to run sewer and water over here, we're going to build a big sports arena, or we're going to do, like, I don't know your list of like big silver bullet things, but like that list should just go in the filing cabinet, close the door, wrap a chain around it, put like 5 locks on it, come back to it in 100 years.
Thank you all. Jeff, there's a few books if anybody's interested.